a lot on TikTok other than some videos in my lives usually, really. But I haven't really been able to come in just because I haven't been feeling up to physical activity or any activity. So I thought that I'd try and make it in today since I hadn't for the last few days. And we're going to go over Homo erectus today just because of the fact that it's a lot easier for me to talk on since it's something that I've been doing for a hot minute, or it's a conversation that we've been having for a while. So it's easy enough for me to remember what I'm talking about when I'm not functioning very well. To make sure that the algorithm works well, I'm going to ask people to like and share the live as much as they possibly can. Commenting is also encouraged, as it will get it up. Oh, yeah. Let me see if I can. Oh, maybe I can do it with this. Come on. Oh, you're a pain in the ass. That might do it. Make it a little bit easier for people to get there. Hi, Arya, Grand Rising. Oh, having a hard time with it. Haven't been feeling well. So that should be able to get to the YouTube. If that doesn't actually give you directly to the YouTube, like if it's still giving you problems, please let me know. I'm not sure why it would be. That doesn't mean that I haven't done something to screw it up, because Lord knows I do a lot of stuff that kind of screws it up. So today we're going to go ahead and talk about Homo erectus a little bit. We've talked about them for a while, so many people coming in here who have been in a while will know a lot of the information that we're going to go over, I'm sure. It's an easy subject for me when my brain isn't working its best. So if you're new to this space, I want to make sure that everybody knows that in my space, I don't deal well with racism, and I don't deal well with phobia based on gender and desire. The theory of race has been debunked, and the theory of race still has been debunked. Racism still exists. Fuck, see, this is what I mean. Racism still exists, and the racist systems still exist. Ethnicity and culture still absolutely exist, and are very important, especially when it comes to people's culture. But because we have this understanding now, it is really important to start making some changes. Changes we should have made a long time ago, right? And so in my space, because TikTok gives everybody who has 1,000 followers, a space. So in my space, we don't deal with racism. We also don't deal with phobia based on gender and desire. There are 3 biological sexes. There are multiple genders. And the idea that one gender supersedes the other gender, or that there are only 2 genders, and all of these other things are indoctrinated into by a society that's trying to keep you in check so they can kill you. And I don't want to have anything to do with that, besides the fact that you're talking to a 2-spirited individual. And so I'm not going to deal with your stuff very easily on it. Zach, you're being problematic. Your comments are problematic. I'm muting you. You can either stay or go. I don't care, but I'm not going to deal with it. As I stated initially, I'm not feeling well. The only reason I'm in today is because I believe I have to come in and make sure that I'm, being here to try and continue to do the things that I'm trying to continue to do. And so I'm not probably going to be here for a whole lot of time, and my patience isn't the best right now. So bias is just life experience telling you your understanding of something. We are all biased. Everything has bias within it. The archaeological record has bias within it. Bias is everywhere. And it's not a problem to have bias. It's a problem to ignore your bias, to not realize that you have a bias, to not realize what biases you're talking from. And it's a problem to only two types of humans. So there's another human species currently living, Carrizo. Nice. I have heard that there is a possibility that Homo florensis still exists. So do you mean Homo florensis? Because if we found proof that Homo florensis still exists, I'd really like to find that proof myself. So if it is two types of humans, like Homo sapien and Homo neanderthal, that are here, please tell me where that understanding comes from, because I would really love to go and find that. So uh, bias is absolutely something that we see everywhere. Bias is natural to us. Bias is, something that is based on experience or based on different things within, or not within, different effects that we've gone through, right? Bias is just a strong inclination of the mind. It's a perceived opinion, preconception, and it happens with everything. We see that bias happens in the archaeological records. Bones that are thin dissolve faster. The reason that we only associate bone or stone tools with the Stone Age, um, the reason that we associate the Stone Age with only stone tools is because we can't find basketry in the archaeological record. That doesn't mean that basketry didn't exist. There's knowledge that basketry probably really existed later on. We can't find clothing in the archaeological record past a certain time, and yet we have other things that tell us that clothing absolutely exists. So the archaeological record itself is biased. We know when it comes to biological material, or is it biological is the word I'm looking for with that, with material that can degrade easily. We know that a cold, dry environment will stop the degradation of DNA, or the degradation of the body itself. And we know that an extremely, like an acrobic environment where you're fully submerged, so like bog bodies, will maintain things like DNA and the flesh of a body much longer. Because we know these things, and we know things like a hyoid bone is harder to find because it's so small. Infants are harder to find because their bones are so thin and light, right? Um, when we look at these things, we can absolutely see that there is this bias within the archaeological record. So everything in this world has bias. It's really not about just trying to find something without bias, because if you're trying to find something without bias, you're never going to. It's about your own ability to ascertain what the bias is, and your own ability to ascertain whether or not their bias is appropriate for the subject that they're speaking on. So, this might mean if somebody is speaking on the Indigenous experience within the United States, somebody should not be speaking on the Indigenous experience within the United States if they are not Indigenous. Their bias is not going to be the correct bias to speak on this. Yet somebody who is Indigenous, their bias is going to understand what is going on within their community and what is happening within their community in a better way. And so when we look at that, we see that bias really is everywhere. It is up to us to assess whether or not somebody's bias is appropriate for the subject. And it is up to us to understand and assess what that means, how that interacts, how that will function within it. We didn't find a Neanderthal hyoid bone until like 5, 6 years ago, right? So up until that point in time, we thought Neanderthal couldn't talk because of the bias within the archaeological record. And yet, after that we found a Neanderthal hyoid bone, we realized that Neanderthal, unless you're indigenous, a PhD in indigenous culture is you being a shithead. You shouldn't have gotten an indigenous PhD in indigenous culture unless you're indigenous. Just stating. Why are you studying another culture instead of studying your own? When we look at Things like the hyoid bone within the archaeological record being such a thin and small bone, it's going to dissolve quick, right? And so when we look at the way that that plays out of the bias within the archaeological record and things like not believing Neanderthals could have verbal communication until recently, we can see that not only do we understand that bias is everywhere, hey people, but we also understand that bias should be changeable based on what you're learning. So, part of growth and part of change, which are things that are innate to humanity, things that are positive always. We should always be changing and we should always be growing. My mother told me when I was little, if you're not learning, you're dying. If you're not growing, you're dying. And we actually see this as true with things like the fact that after a certain age, our body will start or will slow down the way the DNA transcribes, transcription of the DNA. And that's when we start to age and our body starts to degrade and deteriorate, right? Everything on this planet dies, right? Yet when you're growing, you're not dying. So, as we are learning new things, we should be changing our biases. We should be changing our understanding. This is Java Man in the background, though they on Kinnis and Kinnis. I believe that Java Man on Kinnis and Kinnis actually looks a little bit more feminine than masculine, though I also acknowledge and totally believe that my perception of femininity and masculinity and features is, based on a world around me that their world wasn't based on, and again that there are three biological sexes, not two biological sexes, and that there are multiple genders, and we don't really see a gender binary in prehistory. It's actually a very recent idea, gender binary. And we don't really see an idea of gender based roles in prehistory. Not indigenous, but I use olive oil sometimes in my ears. Um, so bias is absolutely necessary, or not necessary. The acknowledgement of the fact that everybody has bias is absolutely necessary. Again, I'm really sick today. My brain is really fuzzy, so my words are going to stumble a little bit, and I'll probably have to go back over them or restate them just to make sure that I'm getting them correct. So, what we consider North European white is very recent, though the allele for light skin can be found in Homo erectus at 900,000 years ago, or at least that's what the DNA has mapped it to. Uh, so we see that light skin only comes up in Homo sapiens roughly, they see that it starts to become more of the population of Homo sapiens around 5,000 years ago. Around 1,000 years ago in Scandinavia, dark skin was still roughly 10% of the populations. I know sometimes these comments can be good, sometimes these comments can be bad. Um, when we are looking at skin tone or the presence or the amount of melanin in skin tone, because we must understand that everybody has melanin in their skin. Everybody has melanin in your eyes as well. Melanin in your eyes is what makes the color of your eyes happen. Somebody having melanin or somebody not having as much melanin, like somebody having more percentage of melanin or somebody having less percentage of melanin is absolutely about the latitude on the equator that somebody's family has lived in. Now, we know now that the alleles for skin tone can change from parent to child, that somebody can have the presence of sun affect them while they're in utero, and they might be darker or lighter than their mother was. That the alleles for skin tone and the alleles for eye color are not necessarily genetic. There is some genetic play within them, but there's a lot of other play within them as well, which is something that should be understood. It should also be understood things like the continent of Africa has every shade of skin tone that you could possibly want prior to colonization. The continent of North America or Turtle Island has every shade of skin tone that you could possibly imagine prior to colonization. Skin tone, again, has to do with where you're at on the equatorial line, how much sunlight you're getting, and how much vitamin D you're getting from the plants around you as well. So It has been proven factually, without a doubt, that light eyes come into play before light skin comes into play in Eurasia. And the reasoning behind this is the fact that you don't necessarily need to have lighter skin for the low sun content, but you definitely have to have lighter eye color for the low light content. So an adaptation takes 100 generations, which is roughly 25 years. Or, sorry, 25 years for a generation, so 2,500 years is what it takes for a species to adapt in an area, or a community to adapt into an area. And so when we're looking at the migration across Eurasia into the western part of Eurasia, we know that in Britain at 10,000 years ago that they were very dark of skin and light of eye. We know that Otzi was dark of skin and light of eye. We know that Scandinavia was settled 7,000 years ago by two groups of people, one who was dark of skin and light of eye coming from the southern regions of western Eurasia, and another that was light of skin and dark of eye coming from the steppes, right? We also know that within the sagas, there are people who are mentioned that are actually dark of skin. Egil, one famous member of the sagas, is actually dark of skin. So when we look at this, we absolutely see that light skin starts much later in our species. Though the alleles for light skin are seen in other species prior to us, like Homo neanderthal, and all the alleles from light skin start with this species right here, which is Homo erectus. So when we're looking at Homo erectus, what we're looking at is kind of a species that's kind of a grandparent to all of the other species that came along, and definitely our grandparent species. Homo erectus is roughly 2 million years old in its first inception. And we now know within the last year that, like the way we speciated, Homo erectus speciates out a convergence of other species. So we see that Homo habilis and Paranthropus boisei and probably Australopithecine species converge to create the Homo erectus species. Um, After Homo erectus, we start to see several other species that we distinguish as human species coming into play. Homo habilis is the only one that we distinguish as a human species before that. The word Homo is Latin for human. So any species with the genus Homo, our genus is Homo and our species is sapien. Any species with the genus Homo is considered a human. So when they talk about things like 1.9 million years ago, we found a human tooth in Georgia, what they're talking about is Homo erectus making it out of the African continent up into Georgia by 1.8 million years ago. So Homo erectus really makes it everywhere across the globe. We see that Homo erectus starts roughly 2 million years ago. We see that after Homo erectus starts and starts pushing its way out across the globe at roughly 100,000 years into their time as a species. Light eyes isn't about vitamin D. Light eyes is about low light adaptation. So light eyes and dark eyes are about the adapting to the light content in your area in sight. So if somebody has extremely light eyes, high sun is like hurts their eyes. If somebody has extremely dark eyes, it's harder for them to see in low light environments. The eye tone is very much about low light adaptation versus a high light adaptation. We see the same thing with the skin tone. It's very much about a highlight adaptation versus a low light adaptation. Yet we get vitamin D from other things. And since we get vitamin D from other things than the sun, it was okay for early Homo sapiens and early Homo erectus moving into your age to have a darker skin tone in those areas without the need to adapt yet to having lighter skin for the presence of vitamin D, because you can get vitamin D from plants. You can get vitamin Ds from everything, right? Everything about you is a gene mutation. So we see that Homo erectus is outside of Africa for roughly 1 million years before they start to see the presence of the light skin allele develop within humans. So we see that the allele for light skin develops within humans at 900,000 years ago within Homo erectus. We see that this starts within Homo erectus, moving into Heidelbergensis and other species within Eurasia, and it's coming from that space within Eurasia. The first species that we see that we think of is actually light of skin. And when we're talking about these, it's important to remember that darker shades of skin versus lighter shades of skin. It's not that everybody is dark chocolate or everybody is translucent white. It's that there is this shade here and this shade here, right? So lighter shades of skin start within Homo neanderthalis. When we see that Homo neanderthalis is developing within Eurasia, Western Eurasia, Europe itself, we see that Homo neanderthalis is developing within a space where having lighter skin, it's okay, we'll just take care of it. I do see that it's getting a little bit weird, a little bit bad, and it hasn't been the last 2 days, a few times, so we haven't been doing as much of this, but we can go ahead and do this. Makes it really easy. You're more than welcome to go to my YouTube and comment if you would like to. If you have questions or things like that, it kind of gives us steps so that not everybody is trolling. So when we are looking at the allele developing, we see that this allele for lighter skin starts developing within Neanderthal. Of course, first it comes from Homo erectus and the other species from Homo erectus, like Heidelbergensis and antecessor, that Homo neanderthalis comes from. Like Homo erectus becomes Homo antecessor and Homo heidelbergensis, though there's still Homo erectus around, and then Homo heidelbergensis and Homo antecessor. Though we're not exactly sure if it is these two species or subspecies of erectus that are who speciate into Neanderthal, we do believe that these are the two species currently that we think of that speciate into Neanderthal. We see that because the light skin allele comes from Homo erectus as a mutation for living outside of Africa on a higher, I guess you could say, latitude, further from the equator, and therefore needing to adapt to lighter skin. Again, adaptations take at least 100 generations, and an adaptation over 100 generations is not going to get you to where you think it is. So if you're going from extremely dark to light, your adaptation over 100 generations might take you from South African dark, like sub-Saharan maybe dark, or what is considered or classified as that, to maybe Middle Eastern dark, right, which is significantly lighter, to maybe steppes, which is lighter still, yet not as light as Northwest Europe, right? So you're going to see that each, 100 generations, it's not going to go from really, really dark to extremely pale white in 100 generations. It's just not how it's going to work. When we're looking at that, what we need to understand is, well, we need to understand quite a few things. A, nobody gave a flying fuck until you gave a flying fuck. And the only reason you gave a flying fuck is because somebody in charge decided that you should give a flying fuck so that you stop trying to overthrow those who are trying to kill you and instead go after your next door neighbor who has never done anything to you. It's the only reason anybody cares about the color of your skin. It's the only reason, so that they can maintain control over you in an indoctrinated society. That's it. That's all. And nobody, before we realized that we could maintain control over others with othering through skin tone, ever gave a flying anyways. So nobody within Homo erectus, Homo neanderthal, Homo heidelbergensis, none of them thought anything of it. Oh, you look kind of different. That's cool. You need to understand that all of our prior species, including us up until 10,000 years ago, really loved anything different. Anything different was attractive to us. Anything different stood out to us. Anything different we had sex with and had babies with. If you look slightly different from me, I'm going to have sex and have babies with you because that's kind of cool. That, and because genetic diversity is actually a boon to a species, to any species. The greater genetic diversity you have within a species, the longer that species continues. I'm going to say that again. The greater genetic diversity you have within a species, the longer that species continues. Why? It's common sense. And if you think about it, you'll see the common sense behind it. And you already know this. Inbreeding is bad. Inbreeding is bad. The wider genetic diversity we have, the better we are as a species. The less mutations we have, the less problems we have physically. So no other species prior to us, and even us up to 10,000 years ago, gave flying. And you only give a flying because the people in control of you who are trying to exploit every last bit out of your body and every last bit out of your soul are ensuring that they can do that by giving you somebody else to hate who's not doing you a dang lick of harm, right? They want you to hate anybody but understanding what's actually harming you. Because if you actually see what's harming you and you actually move to change what is actually harming you, then they're out, right? And they understand that. That's why othering was created, was to maintain control over you. And as long as you buy into it, you're just allowing yourself to be controlled by the 1%, by the government, by the narcissistic God kings that control all of us, who could not care less about you, don't know your name, and all they see is a number that they can exploit, right? When we're looking at Homo erectus moving across the globe, we see that Homo erectus does make it out of Africa by 1.8, 1.9 million years ago. And as they make it outside of Africa, they start to speciate into different species. And they do this through isolation. Speciation through isolation is one of the main ways that species speciate, become a species. There's about 5 different theories of speciation. Speciation through isolation is the top of them. So when Homo erectus is making it outside of Africa into Western Eurasia or into Eastern Eurasia or down into the islands in the South Pacific or into Australia or into Turtle Island, which is North America, which we have evidence of Homo erectus making it to each and every single one of those spaces. When Homo erectus is making it there, they tend to isolate in those areas. And because they've isolated in those areas, they end up becoming a new species within that area. So we see that Homo erectus speciating across the globe speciates into the other species of human that we talk about today, the other species of humans that are on everybody's mind today. Homo neanderthal, Homo denisovan, Homo florensis, Homo luzonensis, Homo naledi, which the Cave of Bones, Unknown Cave of Bones documentary on Netflix is beautiful. We see that as Homo erectus makes it across the globe and starts speciating into different species across the globe, they take a lot of significance of tools and a lot of significant understanding with them. So when we look at the creation of our first tool usage, we've recently found out that it wasn't Homo habilis, handyman, who created our first stone tools, but was in fact Paranthropus boisei, who creates our first stone tools, a complex that we call the Oldowan tool complex. The Oldowan tool complex basically consists of flakes that can be used for cutting or scraping that aren't really refined very much, and hammerstones and cobblestones. Hammerstones and cobblestones, the cobblestone sits on the ground and you put something on top of that cobblestone and you take a hammerstone and you break it open. This extracts marrow from the bone. It breaks apart the bone so that you can use it for awls and for needles and for other implements that are tool usage. We see that Paranthropus boisei was using these Oldowan tool complex tools to butcher hippos at about 3.3 million years ago. So we understand now that Paranthropus boisei is our first tool user, not Homo habilis. So when we look at Homo habilis kind of adapts Paranthropus boisei's tool usage into their usage, but they don't adapt the tools themselves. It's not until we see Homo erectus that we start to see an adaptation of the tools themselves. And with Homo erectus, you start to see the Acheulean tool complex coming into play. This is well known by the Acheulean hand axes, which are usually like 6 inches long. They're not very big. They fit in the palm of your hand and they're a point. And you can scrape with these and you can chop with these. They're not something you're going to hunt with, but they are something you're going to butcher with. When we look at Homo erectus, we see that they actually have a wide variety of tools that they use. From the fact that we know that Homo erectus was able to control and maintain fire usage, to the fact that we know that Homo erectus wore clothing. So these things tell us that Homo erectus is using different things to maintain and create, and that these tools that they have are also giving them advantages. So the advantage that we get from fire is the big brains that we have. Homo erectus kind of scientifically engineered Homo sapien and all their descendant species, and the fact that their usage of fire gave them the ability to cook meat. And by the ability to cook meat, you get the ability to have a greater caloric intake from a less amount of food. So you're going to see that a couple of ounces of meat that's raw is not going to give you as much calorie for a couple of ounces of meat that's cooked. And this is significant when you are pregnant or when you are nursing or when your brain is developing. So in those first few years of your life when you have that brain development going on, this excess calories goes to brain development when it doesn't go to running your body. And so that excess calorie going to brain development is how Homo erectus was able to speciate and evolve into species like Homo neanderthal, who actually have a bigger brain capacity than Homo sapien, us, do. So it is the usage of fire that gives them the ability to create bigger brains and to create some other tools, like you can create a spear better with a fire, and they didn't really have stone tips. Um, and it also gives them the comfort, safety, and warmth that a fire gives you. A fire in your cave will keep predators out. A predator is not going to go near fire. Most animals are terrified of fire. Fire is bad. So you're going to see that Homo erectus having fire within any home that they have creates an ability to kind of keep it safer within that home. I'm not going to be able to do this for long. I am sorry, everybody, but I already know that I'm fading. I'm going to try and keep it up for a little while longer. When we see that Homo erectus is using these tools, we see that they use these tools and take them across the globe. So all of their children, their grandchildren that they speciate into, take these tools as well. We see that Homo neanderthal has all of these tools, and then they advance these tools. They change these tools into something new. We see that the Cerruti mastodon find here in Turtle Island at the San Diego History of Natural History Museum has hammerstones and cobblestones within it. We see that the usage of fire is found at 120,000 years ago in Australia with the Moyhill site. And we see that this usage of fire gives the ability for Homo naledi to crawl through caves and get into the backs of caves to bury their dead and to do cave art. We see that Neanderthal's usage of fire gives cave art. We see that our usage of fire gives cave art. We see that the usage of fire really gives so much. It's really, you have a phone today because somebody used fire for the first time, because somebody controlled fire for the first time. It is how people were able to not only build bigger brains and cook their meat, but have better homes. It's how people were able to create the use of steel to smelt, right? To actually work iron and to work metals, right? So all of these things come from that original usage of fire that we see in Homo erectus. As we're seeing them move across the globe and speciate into these other species in different areas and take these different tools and these different understandings, we see that these other species tend to speciate out as smaller species. Homo neanderthal was probably a much larger species in its species inception, is the understanding. They went through 2 extinction or near extinction events throughout their time as a species, and Homo neanderthal was 600,000 years on the planet as a species, which is 300,000 years longer than we've been on the planet. And they didn't actually die out. They were enveloped within us. So we see that Homo neanderthal is actually still alive today within us. We see that we don't have as much information on Denisovan, seeing as it's much newer, to give a species whole. Our timeline with Denisovan seems to be 400,000 years ago to about 13,000 years ago. So these are 2 of the species that we have some of the most information on that Homo erectus speciates into as it makes it across the globe, which means that the genes and the alleles and everything that those species have within them are genes and alleles that come from Homo erectus, right? So when we're seeing them moving across and they're moving into these spaces and they're speciating within these spaces, adapting specifically to these spaces, their adaptations are very telling of who Homo erectus was as well. We know now that Denisovan has an adaptation for high altitude and for low oxygen, right? And we see that in certain groups today that have a percentage of Denisovan DNA. We know now that there's a thing with the Neanderthals that causes this kind of like a flex or tightness of the tendons in the hand that came across the news as the Viking handshake the other day. Which is seen in some Scandinavian areas. That is a gene from the Neanderthals. Again, all of these genes coming from Neanderthals and Denisovans are going to be genes that come from Erectus. I'm going to go ahead and turn comments on for a few, and then I'm going to go ahead and take off because I just am not functioning as well as I really want to be able to. I can't actually think very well, and I apologize. I'm hoping that it's only going to be a couple more days and then I'll be okay. But when we're looking at We were talking about skin trait evolution because people in the chat were asking about skin trait evolution, and that's what we were talking about within it. I don't think skin trait evolution is as important as many people want it to be. I did see the Inuit have dark eyes, which is true. Many people within a high, so Arctic regions have a tendency to have dark eyes as well. This is because of the reflection of snow off of the sun. They just came out with it, Jedi being a Neanderthal. The YouTube is in Widda Ord. It's up there in the little blue arrow thing. Thank you. We went to an event and my partner found a toy, a friend to play with who ended up having some psychosis, right? And then we went to another event and my partner found another friend to play with. And it turns out their entire camp got sick with COVID. And we don't have COVID because we've tested, but we're definitely sick. And I'm like, you just need to start carrying around tests for anybody that you're going to play with. Here, before we play, you need to take a test for a cold and a test for COVID and a test for whether or not you're psychotic. So, but I'm just like, oh, really not feeling very well today. And this is actually better because the last couple days, like Sunday night, I couldn't even sleep because my whole body just hurt so bad. So this is actually like a lot better than it's been. Thank you. I'm sorry. I feel better too. When we're looking at Homo erectus making it across the globe, I don't really think the alleles for skin tone really are that important. I think it's way more important to understand that they had the usage of fire. And what the usage of fire brings, again, the ability to create bigger brains and the ability to make spears better. I also think it's more important to understand that they're the first that have clothing, right? The first to cover their bodies with something else. I think it's also more important to understand that they crossed water. Like not only did they cross water to get to the island of Flores in Indonesia, which has never been above the water line, so they absolutely had to cross water to get it, but they crossed water to get to Australia, and they crossed water to get to the Alalu Zone in the Philippines because it's below the Wallace Trench, which Flores Island is in the middle of, is this space that's never been above sea level because of how deep it is. And they also crossed water to get to Turtle Island, North America. And so when we see them crossing water, I think that's huge. I think it's also extremely huge that they had language, right? We are talking about, well, everything has language, and that should be understood that even the trees and the animals have language. They had verbal language, spoken language like we do. And I think that that's important to understand. We can tell this from the pathways of their brain capacity, like on the base of their brain, we can see the pathways for language. And we can also tell this for the way that their rib cage is shaped and the way that that expels air so that you can talk and still breathe. Fire language, crossing water, clothing. I'm trying to think. All these things to me are way more important. All these things to me really are the huge part of how we get to where we are as a species today. Thank you. It's kind of fading out in the front. I know I need to redo it soon. And so I think that when we're looking at these prior species, those are the things that we need to really look at. Not what we have decided to create division in our species over. I also think it's really important to look at things like Homo erectus is made out of a convergence of species. Thank you, Chi. I wish you were here to give me a hug. I don't want you here, though. Don't come over because I'm sick. Don't come over. But yeah, I'm like, oh. So when we're looking at that coming to being out of convergence of species, we also see that we come to being out of a convergence of species. And when we understand that we come to being out of convergence of species and not out of isolation, that we understand that, so lover, I don't like the way that statement sounds because that makes it sound like that's an evolutionary step forward, which is that very racist thought process that came across in the theory of race when the theory of race was in play and came across in the theory of evolution. And the old European white dudes were saying that. So it is not an evolution, it's an adaptation. So we can adapt from being dark of skin to being light of skin, depending on, and not you or I, but our descendants can adapt from being darker skin to lighter skin depending on our space on the equator and where we live, but it is not evolution. So, yes, we can adapt, but no, we do not evolve because that would indicate that one is superior to the other and neither is superior. Both work specifically in specific spaces. And let's be real, black works better across the globe than white does because you can't be ultralight and go into a heavy sun content area and not fucking be burned to a crisp within a few minutes. So um, it would definitely not be an evolutionary step forward, right? So no, it's not evolved. Yes, it is an adaptation. I don't know. I don't study animals. I study humans. So when we're looking at that movement and all of the things that Erectus brings with it, we see that they get those things out of the fact that they converged. And when we look at us and we see that we come out of convergence, we also see that all of these little biases and all of these little prejudices and all the racism and all the othering that we are dealing with that are across the globe currently that are created by the narcissistic God Kings, the 1%, those in power that are trying to control us. Right? All of these otherings that are created are absolutely a creation because these are things that we did not have before 10,000 years ago. We didn't care before 10,000 years ago. And the only reason we care today is to try and maintain power, is because there are people out there that are trying to maintain power, because they're trying to exploit everything they can and hoard all that they can. And so, in their need to try, or desire to try and maintain power and to try and exploit everything that they can, they want you to not see what they're doing. It's a sleight of hand to make you hate your neighbor instead of make you be aware of what's going on. If marginalized groups everywhere gathered together and fought back against what the fuck is going on instead of, well, that group is bad because that group is bad because that group is bad, instead of realizing that that's the group that's bad, that group would be gone, right? That's why these things are in place, because by othering, by making you believe that somebody else is the problem instead of the government is the problem, they maintain power over you. And bye. You didn't need to announce your exit. When they look at that, this is absolutely something that comes out of the start of stratification. It comes out of that narcissistic God Kings. When we're looking at our convergence that creates us, we're looking at our creation as a species being in a space where there are multiple species around us. So we're not looking around us and seeing differences, we're looking around us and seeing similarities. When your mother is a Heidelbergensis and your father is an antecessor and your grandmother is an Erectus, do you see an Erectus, a Heidelbergensis, and an antecessor, or do you see mom, dad, and grandma? Right? Anyways, as I was stating, I am going to go ahead and take off because I am not feeling very well. I never said I was against evolution. I said that stating that evolving, that black to white was evolution, was an evolving, was false and problematic. That it is an adaptation, it is not an evolutionary step because it is not a step forward, right? So I never said anything about not believing in evolution. I stated that that word in that sentence was the wrong word in that sentence. Not necessarily lighter rigs, but narcissistic. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. 170,000 years ago is the last Homo erectus. No, you didn't come from monkeys. You came from her. So I'm going to go. I will try and be back in a couple of days when I'm feeling better, so that I can actually function through a couple of hours instead of. I actually stated that black skin was superior. I literally stated That's why you can't say it's an evolution from black to white, that it's actually that light skin is actually detrimental in many places across the globe, and there's no place that dark skin is detrimental. So dark skin is absolutely superior to light skin, and I absolutely stated that. Just where, absolutely. Absolutely. Dark skin is absolutely better than light skin. Absolutely, 100%. So, okay, so I am gonna go instead of answering the comments, and I will be back. I just wanted everybody to know that I will be back within a couple of days. I know I've been gone for a couple of days. As soon as I am feeling better and capable, I can't state when I'll be on again. If you subscribe to the YouTube channel that's up there, it will tell you when I am on, because it does that better than TikTok does. And I always go live on YouTube at the same time that I go live on TikTok. Um, I, I mean, I've given you facts on pretty much everything I've stated, and I mean, anybody who states that they're always honest is absolutely lying. I do, in fact, though, do my best to be as open and honest. You also think I'm white and female, honestly. You think I'm white and female just by looking at me, and I'm neither. And so that makes you think that some white woman is saying this shit, and I'm not a white woman. So um, mm, nobody's disproven the Big Bang sky. We've only talked about that half of it. I will take one question. Hey, if you want to ask a question, I'm absolutely, and then I am going to go. Um, I'm indigenous, though my grandmother was black. I'll answer Hay's question if Hay has a question, but then I am going to go. Only because Hay asked a question about, he wanted to ask a question about Erectus, or they wanted to ask a question about Erectus. Forensic archaeology does more with trying to understand how somebody died than their culture. And so I'm not sure, and forensic archaeology is one of those things that we have a dearth of. There's not a whole lot of forensic archaeologists. So I'm not sure if we have a lot of forensic archaeology, that archaeologists who work on um, other species, right? We do have a lot of archaeology based on the culture of other genuses, and other species within our genus. So you'll see that there is archaeology trying to figure out what the culture is within Paranthropus boisei or within Lucy, yes. Though it wouldn't be forensic archaeology, because again, forensic archaeology is more about basically making a case for how somebody died, is what forensic archaeology is trying to figure out how somebody died. Um, in most archaeology that we have, like a lot of our sites are like cave collapses, right? And then everybody else left, right? The people that are there, right? Um, so when we're looking at that, we're not seeing so much forensic archaeology, but we do see cultural anthropology trying to figure those things out, and archaeology trying to figure those things out. My website is widdaord.com, and on it I've compiled a bunch of articles that have that are starters for you, so that you can look at that article and go and dig deeper on that article. There is an Erectus tab underneath there, and it'll give you information on Erectus. I don't tend to focus on other species outside homogeneous. So like I don't have a lot on Paranthropus boisei. I think I have like maybe one when we saw the older one tool complex coming from them. I tend to focus on genus Homo, yet you will find stuff for genus Homo on there, and different information. Again, these are articles that I think that you can reach instead of articles that are kept behind a paywall. So they might be a CNN article or something like that. I don't support CNN. I think most of the major news outlets are fucked up, yet I do know that these articles will give me the information so I can dig deeper. So you'll read a CNN article and I'll say this archaeologist wrote this paper, and so you can go and find that paper, and I give you that so that you can go and find that paper and pull it up in a method that you're actually able to pull up. And so you're going to find a few different. You'll just have to kind of search through them, see what you want, and then go and dig a little bit deeper. Part of that is also my encouraging people to dig a little bit deeper, right? Because you need to dig a little bit deeper. When we are passionate, we want something, we want to learn something, we learn better, right? So if you're doing your own digging and you're doing your own looking at it, you're going to retain the information better. And so that's a part of it as well. And yeah, media is fucked up all over. I don't even I don't even listen to media within the United States anymore. Um, before I go, there are certain things that are very much who we are as a species. The things that are unique to us is we have mandatory midwifery, which means we must have community, somebody else to help us birth our children. We have 5 life stages from neonate to adult, which means that we must have community to nurture us from infancy, firstborn, to adulthood, which is the full development, the closure of your brain, the finalization of your brain development, which for us currently is 25 years. This has changed and gotten more over the course of time. But these two things mean that we are innately nurturing and we are innately communal. Okay. One other thing that we really are is innately curious. We're the only species on this planet that adapts its adaptations. Many things on this planet adapt the world around them. We are the only ones that take those adaptations and then adapt those adaptations. So when we're looking at ourselves as a species, we are innately nurturing, we are innately communal, and we are innately curious, right? We come out of a convergence of species and we have spent our entire life until all the other species died, none of which we killed off, but all of which we enveloped into us that we came across as explorers, finding new people and having sex with new people all the time. That's how we have up to 7 other species that we currently know of within us, like in modern Homo sapien DNA. When we're looking at that, we are looking at the fact that we as a species, being innately nurturing and innately communal, live in a society that is anything but. And because you currently live in a society that is not nurturing, that encourages you to not be communal and encourages you to not nurture those around you, encourages you to follow somebody else's idea of perfection instead of finding your own, so encourages you to lack creativity, because we live in a society like that, we are all pretty depressed. We're all kind of hurting, or at least the vast majority of us are kind of hurting. Those of us who are in that space, when I think you might have misunderstood something I said. Regs, the so Neanderthal was lighter of skin, but there's no narcissism that we've identified within Neanderthal. What I was talking about was the government being narcissistic and said that I don't think skin color associates with that. Neanderthal is lighter skin, though. So when we're looking at that, what we need to understand is that as a species, being nurturing and communal, when we lack nurture, when we lack community, we are having a healthy reaction to an unhealthy society. So if you're depressed, if you feel anxious, if you feel alone, this is a healthy reaction to an unhealthy society. It's okay. You're necessary and you're worthy. You are worthy just by existing. You don't have to be worthy in the idea of narcissistic God kings that are the 1%. You don't have to be worthy in anybody else's idea. You are worthy just by existing, and you are necessary just by existing. As a species that is innately nurturing, do you have a problem with the picture of Homo erectus, Catherine? As a species that is innately nurturing, we have to understand that being, and I'm talking about sapien currently, being a species that is innately nurturing and innately communal, when you're living in a space where that innate nurture and that innate communal is removed. Well, they were around for 1.2 million years as a dark-skinned species, and the timeline that they found this skeleton, the skull within, is prior to the presence of light skin alleles. So she would have been dark. There's no question about whether or not she would have been dark. And we were talking about Homo erectus, but I'm trying to say goodbye. And as I'm trying to say goodbye, I'm trying to remind you just I know that she was dark. I like this image because Kinnis and Kinnis shows the humanity within this image. Kinnis and Kinnis's images show the humanity within them, and that's why I use the Kinnis and Kinnis images. I use this Kinnis and Kinnis image because of the variety of Kinnis and Kinnis images that I have. I like the amusement in her eyes and the curve of her smile. And I currently use this image because I've been requested several times to use this image because there are many people out there who are dark of skin who really enjoy this image. And they have requested me to use this image. And so we're currently using this image not only on that, but on the fact that it is a beautiful image of somebody who would have looked exactly like this. So when we're looking at who we are as people, we absolutely see that we are absolutely nurturing and absolutely communal. Taking a look at that and taking a look at everything that you're dealing with today, give yourself some grace when you're sad. Give yourself some grace when you're depressed and realize that you are worthy and you are needed. And that it is only those of us who can see the problems within society today who can change them. Those who are just chugging along and don't see an issue are not healthy, right? And you are needed and you are healthy. Have a wonderful day. And I will be back in a few days when I'm feeling a little bit better, and we'll talk a little bit longer then. And I hope that everybody holds within them the necessity of them and the worth of them, right? You don't know what brainwashing is, but that's okay. Maybe you'll stick around and learn. Have a great one, everybody. Good night. Good night. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And for those of you still on YouTube, much love. I'll try and come back in a couple of days when I'm feeling just a little bit better. It will pop up on the subscribe on YouTube, so you will know when I'm going live. But I'll be back soon. Take care and have a great one.